So I thought the best way to start out maybe is to talk a little bit about the Napa fires. That was the most recent natural disaster we've had in California. To refresh your memory, that fire involved a series of fires. There were dozens of them, if not hundreds. Involved 8,900 structures destroyed, 245,000 acres burned, over $3 billion in damage. 8,900 buildings were destroyed, and there were 43 fatalities. I remember, my story is by far the most boring of any of the ones you're going to hear tonight. I was here, and I was logged in looking for some leads that we could go over for my class later that day, and I just saw, it seemed like out of nowhere, these fires started and swept through and caused so much damage. So I'm wondering if maybe we can start with, we'll start with you, Rich. What were you doing that morning? And tell me a little bit about how you got the call and what you did when you got the call to go out to those fires.
Well, that was about 4 a.m.
Let me give you a minute.
Okay, it was about...
You have to flip it on.
Okay. How do you do this?
Here you go. Here's one.
Yeah.
Here's one. This will be this man. Go do this.
I don't do hand microphones. It's his job. Anyway, I was asleep. It was about 4 in the morning, and my phone went off, and I used my cell phone as an alarm, and I heard it going off, and the first thing I'm thinking is, it can't be 6 a.m. already, because that's when I normally get up. And I looked at the phone, I thought, oh, this isn't good. And the ironic part is, right before I went to bed that night, the winds were really howling. And I thought to myself, if the winds keep up like this, and I've covered a lot of forest fires in this region over the years, and I thought if this winds keep going this bad, we've got a problem. Well, I had a bigger problem than I realized. They called me and said, you got to go to Napa right now, because Napa and Santa Rosa are burning. Now, I grew up in Santa Rosa, and those neighborhoods that got hit there, I knew all those neighborhoods. A friend of mine, who I went to high school with, they barely got his mother out in time. And so my first stop, though, was to go to Napa, and the CHP tried to block me from going up this hill over Napa, between Napa and Vacaville, the Montecito Heights area. And the officer was very sincere about trying to save my life, but he was violating the law. The California law allows media to go in. So I just pushed my way through, and started to regret doing that because I came along a road where the fire was just racing along. Several trees were already down the road, and I wasn't going to go anywhere that direction. So I turned around, went up another road, and got another wall of fire at me, and then turned to another road and found some houses burning. Started shooting that, and then I looked over, and a house was about 25 yards away from me, and there was a wall of fire much further back, and within seconds, that wind had pushed that fire and took that house out. It was just an incredible scene to watch it just destroy this house. I did that, raced into Napa, I got the pictures out there. I got into Napa about 9 a.m. and worked along the Silverado Trail, shot several fields. These people desperately trying to get horses out of a pasture as the flames are coming down. Shot that for a while, and just worked through the night and through the day there. And then Tuesday they sent me up with the National Guard to photograph the burn areas through Sonoma County, and then the Wednesday through the rest of the time they kept me in Santa Rosa because I knew the areas and I knew to go. The hardest one, there's two hard ones that week. The very first day, I came across these men whose parents were killed in fire. They were the first fatalities recognized in the fire in Napa, and they were very gracious, and they talked to it. I photographed them and moved out. And then on Friday, I was up in by Oakdale. I'd gone into a burn area up in the mountains, and I was coming back down at the fire break. There's some people there, and they were very concerned, and they had asked me if I'd been down this way road. And no, I hadn't. And they said, well, can you go back and look and see if our houses are there? So I went back in, and again, this was a very big, bad, active burn area. Well, the one guy's house was there, but the lady's wasn't, and I had to come back and to tell somebody, your house is gone, and watch them react. I told her, she reacted, The first thing I did after for a moment was I grabbed my camera and took pictures. And I know that sounds heartless and cold and everything like that, but it was the only protection I had for the moment, for myself. And afterwards I talked with her, I said, I'm sorry for doing that to you. She said, well, no, it's okay, because you need to tell what's going on out here. And that's how I look at covering catastrophes. None of us here want to be there at these things. But we feel, at least I do, that if I at least show people what's going on out there, that's how they're gonna get the help.
Mike, were you out there first thing that morning?
So we got a call from the assignment desk at home, you know, hey, there's a big fire in Napa, so that means you get into your fire gear. We have these outfits that are yellow or green, and you know, protect you from Nomex, that protect you from the flames a little bit. And got to the station, loaded up all our gear in a big truck, and of course you're on the road. It's an hour and a half to Napa on a good day. When there's fire and flames and smoke and everything else, it's going to take you a lot longer because you have checkpoints, you have places that are impassable, you can't get there, and you start doing the logistics thing. Okay, we're going to get there at say 11:30, 12 o'clock. You already know that you're live at 4, you're live at 5, you're live at 6, and right now we got nothing. So you have to hustle, you have to hurry, and now you're going into an area that's laden with smoke, there's debris, there's damage, there's people all over the place, and you have a logistical challenge too, because in many of these places you're in rural, high terrain, rough terrain, and there's no cell service, because often the cell phone, the towers are knocked out. So you can't communicate with your station, you can't let them know where your progress is or what you're doing, you can't call people and say, how's this winery doing, how's that, so you're pretty much on your own, and you have to just arrive at these places and hope for the best. So I remember, just like Rich, going up the Silverado Trail in our truck, and luckily the gates were open, and there we got to the top of this winery. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it burned to the ground. And it was just completely leveled, and there on top was one guy who happened to be the curator there. He was French, spoke a little bit of English, and he was more than willing to share his story about what happened and what it was like to try to save his vineyard. And he actually had a glimmer of hope, because he said, the buildings burned down, but the vineyard over here behind us is still standing. So that was hopeful. We talked to him. We looked at logistics in terms of how we're going to get this back. We started cutting sound and cutting video, sending it back to the station via microwave, and then started plotting, okay, what's our next step going to be? We also had a tip from one of our folks in the newsroom who had a cousin who knew a friend, who had somebody who knew a friend. Anyway, through third degree of separation, we found this couple that was a husband and wife team that was also in the Napa area, and they had their own little vineyard that they rented out from some people next to a marijuana grow. So that was a little bit tricky. They didn't want everything to be seen, but we sort of scooted up there and talked to them about what their loss was like. And it was interesting to see, people will often share, and sometimes in the worst of times, you'll see the best of behavior. People will want to get the story out, like Rich said, because they know that by doing so, they're going to get help. They're going to, especially Sacramento is your audience, the state capital, money, resources, opportunities, the governor is seeing it. They look at those pictures, they look at those images, and they know that they need help, and they can deploy troops and Office of Emergency Services and all that. So we felt we were doing a little bit of a public service as well. And sure enough, we got the interviews we needed, and we got it all wrapped up and together, and we were live at 4, 5, and 6, and hopefully told some compelling stories. And then, you come home and it's 8:30, 9 o'clock, it's a long day, and then you go back and do it again the next day. But there's so many stories to tell, you just feel like you're just making a dent, a small dent in the surface, because there's so many people there that have been affected. And like Rich, your heart goes out to them. You try to be compassionate and understanding. Some people want their privacy, you have to respect that. Others are willing to talk, and then you can, hopefully get some stories. But it's just about sharing and sending the pictures back to make it as compelling as you can be, and we were able to do that day, so felt good about that.
Sam, you've covered dozens of these, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, you were the sort of coordinating our coverage at the beginning of the Napa fires.
Well,
How do you, yeah,
I'll tell you
yeah,
what happened.
okay, go ahead.
I decided that this would be the year that I would go to the big fire. And so for 6 months, I've had my fire gear in the trunk of my car. ready to go. And I wrote a story the Friday before the fires broke out saying, hey, everybody says there's going to be big fires this weekend because of the weather forecast. And I got a call. And I got a call Monday morning from my editor about 9 o'clock, which is late. Because I'd been up since 4 reading the Chronicle, and the Chronicle had been all over it. It was amazing. And she said, you know, you're probably going to have to go to Santa Rosa. And I said, well, I'm on the beach. I was in Watsonville for her birthday. So I missed the entire first day.
Oh, yeah.
And then we came back, and I tried to coordinate it from the office while Margie went up to Loma Rica to talk to people up there. So,
Well, you've done these, so many of these. I mean, where do you even start with your reporting on something like this? It just seems like such a massive thing to cover. How do you know where do you go? Who do you talk to?
First you go to the editors and you say, I think we need to send so-and-so here and so-and-so there, and, you know, figure out who's going out in the field. And then you have to go to those people, because you know who you can count on and who is gonna need help, and you have to tell the people who are gonna need help. You have to call me, you have to tell me what you see, and you have to call me regularly, and you have to go talk to people. I mean, more than anything else, you have to go talk to people who are in the middle of these fire zones. Don't go to the CAL FIRE briefings, because that's a complete waste of time. I can watch that on, you know, from my desk. I mean, don't hang out with the firefighters unless you're doing a feature on them. Go find people. And so, you know, the editors will send the team out, and this was particularly difficult for us because we had to go to Santa Rosa, we had to go to Napa, we had to go to Loma Rica and Butte County, and nobody knew the first 2 days where our part of the story was going to be, you know, because we don't cover the state the way we used to, so we have to pick and choose. But this thing was so massive that we had to have people everywhere. And then in the middle of it, we realized we didn't have anybody in Mendocino. So, you know, Ryan Lillis, who had been driving around all day long in Santa Rosa, said, I'll go, and drove up late in the afternoon and stayed up there into the evening, and then came back down. So it's like moving chess pieces. You were just moving people until it got dark and it wasn't safe, and then, you know, you'd figure it out the next morning.
Margie, you spoke to, in the immediate aftermath of the fires, a lot of people and told their stories. How do you approach people and get them to talk about what they've lost? Is it hard? Do you find they usually want to speak to you? What's your experience been?
Yeah, generally speaking, they do. And one thing I'd like to say is, you know, of course, with victims, you know, you handle them tenderly. We arrived initially at the fairgrounds to try to just talk to the people who were there who had been evacuated from the area. And we met a couple when we first got there because we were going to cross the fire line shortly. And to match Rich's story, there was a couple there who didn't know what had happened to their home. They had a piece of property that they shared with their family. It was a 10-acre lot, and there were 3 family homes on this 10 acres. And they barely got out, and they just wondered, were their structures still there? And it was that journalistic ethical dilemma of, they said, will you please go up? Here's how you get to our place. Please go up and tell us if our homes are there. And, you know, of course, you learn in journalism school, don't get involved with the subject, and this isn't your place. But we just couldn't help ourselves. And so the photographer and I, we went and we found the property. All the houses were gone. Everything was gone. And then we sat in the car and we looked at each other, and it was still burning. I mean, it was still smoldering, and it could have flared. So it was not a particularly safe situation, but we sat looking at each other in the car and saying, do we call them? Because we weren't going to be able to get really what you got, the reaction. So we did. We called them and we told them, and interestingly enough, they were angry with us. So sometimes you get those sorts of surprises, but that was their way of venting, you know, their loss. That was somewhat unusual.
What did they say?
They were just angry, you know. They were, they didn't want to talk anymore, and they were kind of sorry they talked to us, but they were upset. I mean, they'd lost everything. So it was completely understandable to Randall and me that was, you know, I mean, they were entitled to their emotions and just give them a wide berth. But to answer your question specifically, I do find in situations like this that most people, unless they've told their story over and over and over and over again, really do want to share the story with you. And, you know, I take as much time as they want to hear them tell it and to repeat themselves. Where we run into difficulty, of course, you know, you all probably remember there was the older couple, the husband and wife who died in Napa.
That was the one that I got to.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, that, I think by the time we reached them, they'd been called, you know, the story was so poignant. It was a couple, the wife was in 96?
102 and 98, something.
Something like that. And, you know, they died together. And the actual is, did you get, there was a son who was from the Newcastle area.
Oh, yeah.
The two sons, and that he actually zipped the body bag shut on one of his parents. So it was just tragic, and I hated to call them because I knew we were like 10th or 11th in line, and they were really tired of telling their story at that point. So
I was lucky. I was like number 2
yeah,
there when I got to them, and they were very nice, and they described how, in a way, it was, I wouldn't say a blessing, but they'd all discussed how their parents were so close, they'd been together for so many years. What's going to happen when one of them dies? Well, they died together, and the father was found, the mother was an invalid, had a stroke. They slept in separate bedrooms. The father was found outside the door of his wife's room. And this is what the son was willing to talk about. And to see them, you have to just kind of take a step back. And like I said, this is my friend. This protects me. I keep it up, and it keeps me for a while of having to feel. But when you drive home that night, you feel everything. So.
Rich, I'm gonna put a couple of your photos up. I wanted to ask you though, how do you get afraid? Do you get scared out there? You're very close to the action. Let me illustrate. Here's a winery, I guess.
No, that was next to a winery. It was burning up. That whole area was burning up.
Okay, that looks kind of close.
That was close. Yeah, that was the wind. The wind just kind of swept up on me. I mean, really fast. And that thing. I had my Nomex on, and it was time to leave. And those are the horses that were racing out of that field. The people were trying to get them out.
did they get them out?
They got them out. Yeah, in fact, they got 2 of them out by a halter, and then these 2 wouldn't leave, and they finally just cut the fence, and I watched them run out. So that felt good, you know. Afraid, that's a strange question, because like I say, the camera, it sounds strange. The camera acts like a shield when you have it in front, and you have to not let the situation overcome you while you still have to be aware of the situation around you. You know, because if you start getting wrapped up in seeing stuff and you're not taking pictures anymore, you're not doing your job of reporting. I went up to Roseburg, Oregon 2 years ago when they had the mass shooting at the school. Well, that night I got up there and they have a candlelight vigil, and you're seeing all these people teary-eyed and upset and naturally, and you're watching this and you're feeling this. You have to keep telling yourself, just do your job and be polite to people. Remember, there's a human being on the other side of that camera. So try to be kind and respectful in doing your job. And then later on, you also, if you're in bad situations, you have to keep your head moving because you don't know what's around you, and you need to be able to get out of there. You have to have, in fires, you have to have an escape plan. You have to know, like that there, I made sure to keep my car ready when I got out to start shooting this, because what happens if you shut your car off at a fire like that? Sometimes you can't get it restarted because the smoke interferes with the enough, you know, combination in the fire in the combustion chambers and the cylinders, so you can't start your car. And so you have to keep your engine running. So you have to keep your mind concentrating on stuff like that, but still keep shooting what you're doing. You run off, you know, you go to the next spot. You know, so.
Mike, how do you, when you're covering these stories, they're so exhausting, and I imagine, they're emotionally draining too because you're talking over and over. I mean, how do you keep your energy up? How do you just keep how do you keep doing it for day after day?
I think you kind of go on automatic pilot, you know, when you're there, you have a job to do, you sort of cognitive dissonance that you separate yourself from what you're feeling emotionally, even though you have these human feelings of seeing people at their worst possible moment. But at the same time, if you can chronicle it, if you can document it, it somehow makes it real and alive for people at home, and especially, like I said, for the audience, you know, the legislature, the Capitol, government officials who are looking at this and can make determinations that this area needs help. One of the things that you learn, at least in television news, is that you have to be very strategic in how you cover these fires, because there isn't enough time to cover everything. They're far away. It takes a long time to get there. There's a lot of windy roads. So basically you have a choice. You can either do flames or evacuees. You can't get both. Because if you go to the flames, there's going to be no people. They've all evacuated. If you go to the evacuees, they are in a safe shelter, presumably a red shelter, a Red Cross shelter, something like that. That's where the human stories are. That's where you can meet with people and they'll talk with you. And that's where you get your great best sound. But if you want to get visuals, you're going to lose out on that. So we try to, you know, pre-assign stories ahead of time when we're sitting around our newsroom talking about how we're going to do the coverage. Often one crew will be assigned to the flames, the other crew will go get the people angle. And then we meld them together so we have live team coverage at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock. And here's one crew in Loma Rica or Napa or wherever the fire is. And then here's another crew talking about the human elements of all this. And that way it kind of blends together as a more complete, more complex story. But that's part of the dynamics that we go through when we cover fires.
Sam, when you're talking to people who haven't been out on a natural disaster before, what do you tell them, and what mistakes do you see them making the most often? We have a lot of students here who hopefully will be covering some of these things in a year or two or three. What are the things that they should know that first day out there?
Don't wait. And I've talked to Rich about this 100 times, where he and I are the only two people someplace, because our strategy was always, you can't miss it if you get there early. You can miss it if you get there late. And so, you know, I've seen reporters wandering around the newsroom an hour after they've been told to go, and that doesn't work. You gotta go, man. I mean, the minute it happens. And my strategy for, you know, a disaster of virtually any type was, the first thing you do was go to the evac center and get those people, and then go to the actual site.
Exactly.
Because you gotta get people.
Right.
And, I mean, I'll tell you, I went up to the Bowles fire in Weed a couple of years ago, and I left at 2 a.m. Because it broke out that night, and I thought, okay, I am golden. I got there at 5 a.m., and I went to the evac center, and from there, every other place I went, everybody said the same thing to me. Gee, Kevin Fagan from the Chronicle was here 45 minutes ago. I told him everything. You know, so I had waited, leaving at 2 a.m. was too late. I should have left at midnight that night. Yeah,
when they
well,
wouldn't let us in for a while.
right. When they didn't understand the law.
Yeah, that was,
and
that
they
was
didn't
the
care.
thing. Yeah, law enforcement.
But the main thing, particularly for us, is because we've got photographers wandering around on their own, you know, getting the visuals, is you gotta have people. You can't just tell the story by saying, I'm looking at flames and, you know, they're 100 feet high. You've gotta have people telling us what happened to them. So, you know, that's the first thing. And the biggest mistake is to worry about what the officials are saying. Because I can get that sitting at my desk. You know, that's, if you're on the scene, you need to be calling me or whoever's doing rewrite and saying, here's what so-and-so said. Just get, you know, the basic, just talk to them. What happened? Get their names, get their ages, and then I'll always tell people, well, look around, what do you see? And they'll describe it to me. And that's, you know, that's how I write the story. So, I mean, the more people you talk to, the better the story that I'm gonna write is gonna be.
I was just going to add one thing that can be helpful as from a student perspective is, how do you approach these folks that are having the absolute worst day of their lives? How do you get the story and not invade their privacy and approach them in the right way? So I'll give you some examples. If you're at one of these evac centers, you know, you look for visual clues, first and foremost. Look around and see who's looking at you and who's avoiding you. A lot of people will avoid eye contact because they're traumatized, they don't want to talk to the media, and so you just give them their space and respect their privacy. Other people will have a tear in their eye and they'll look to you as sort of a human being, and you can just go up and approach and say, have you heard any word about your home? And sometimes they have and sometimes they haven't, and if they've lost everything or don't know, and I just try to be compassionate and say something like, I'm really sorry about your loss. I'm so sorry to hear that. Try to connect on a human emotional level before you get into your question and answer. Just connect first as a human being. How long have you lived there? Is your family okay? Do you need any help? Is there anything else that you need at this point? And then after you kind of build a rapport, then you can be a little bit more formal and just say, hey, I'm Mike from KCRA 3 and we're here to tell your story. We want to hear from people just like you who have been through this. Can you tell me in your own words what happened, what you've been through? And that kind of approach, I think, often works. We usually get some pretty good results, and sometimes they're uncomfortable being in front of a camera, but our photographers are really, really good about making people feel at ease and comfortable. You try to put them in a good light, in a good context, maybe their family is surrounding them so they feel comfortable, and let them know that they're there to tell their story. And that could be helpful just in terms of how you approach these folks and have a successful outcome.
Do you push, Mike?
I try not to push with the victims because they've already been through enough. If they want to talk, they will. If they don't, coaxing and pushing and prodding usually doesn't help. I'll push with the officials if they're not giving me the answers I want, or CAL FIRE or whoever it might be, or when is this road going to open up, because they have an official duty, and part of that includes notifying the press, keeping us informed. But if someone's been through the worst day of their life, let them tell their story in their own way, in their own words.
One thing I wanted to say is, for those of you who are considering going into journalism, the inevitable part of a disaster story are the victim stories, the people who died, and having to do profiles. And I ended up having to pull that duty the weekend after the fire, as the little vignettes on everybody who perished. And it's really awful, to have to do that. But one thing that I have noticed that is really refreshing, and I'd be curious from Mike, in broadcast if the same is true, I would say maybe 10 or 15 years ago in newspapers, victims were always perfect. They were always saints. We would never say anything bad about a victim of a plane crash, of any calamity. It was just not done. And nowadays, I think we understand that what people want is truth, and people aren't perfect. And so I try to be careful when I do the victim stories to not sanitize these people's lives, because what people want to read is that they're just like you and me. I mean, and they were. So for instance, when I was working on the victim's profile, there's one woman who was mentally ill. We didn't shy away from that. There was a guy who had, well, actually I didn't put this in. He had a criminal record as long as your arm, because I had to look him up on LexisNexis. But I did say that he wouldn't leave his pickup, and that's why he died, because he just bought a new pickup, and he didn't want to leave his pickup, and guess what? His pickup made it, and he didn't. So I just think that's kind of a refreshing trend in journalism, is I think we're more honest now about victims as real people and not cardboard perfect saints.
And how do you convey that, or do you convey, when you're interviewing the families of these victims, do you give them notice that it's going to be an honest portrayal, or how do you even delve into that topic?
It depends on how. I mean, if you only have a few victims, you can go into more depth.
Right.
Yeah, I would let them know.
Yeah.
Definitely what to expect in the profile. Usually with the short anecdotes, you don't have a lot of space. But I was reading all of the LA Times, the Chronicle, everything, and I noticed that everyone was doing that. They were really portraying, even if they were short anecdotes, they were portraying them as multidimensional people, with sometimes complicated lives, troubled lives. There were some people who were borderline homeless. So I liked seeing that in my, I don't know, do you find that you're more likely to do that now, or?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There is a quest for honesty, more transparency in reporting. People want real people out there, and the flip side of that is we're seeing, I think, different attitudes also from people towards us in the media. You know, when you go on these flyers, you're going to different locations that have different cultural attitudes towards news and reporters. Napa, very different, for example, from Loma Rica, where we covered a lot of fires. In Napa, you get a lot of entrepreneurial kind of people who are, you know, into vineyards and wine and connoisseurs and that kind of thing. They tend to be a little bit maybe more sophisticated. Some of them come from San Francisco. Loma Rica is very different completely. It's unlike Sacramento in almost every way. You go north up Highway 70 to Marysville and take a right on Highway 20 and go up into the woods and make a right by the pickup truck and down by the barn and take a left, and you're in Loma Rica. It's very rural. It's very redneck. It's very poor. You find a lot of pickup trucks with Trump bumper stickers. It's very different than Sacramento. So you just have to kind of be acclimate to the climate that you're in, and you'll find a lot of people who don't like the media. We get a lot. I've had many people, you know, come up and say, "Fake news. Fake news is here," because that's how they think. So you just try to be as polite and professional as you can, and just say, "Okay, I'm here to, you know, to do my job, and if you'd like to talk, I'll happy to talk to you." "Nope, don't want to talk to you. You won't tell my story right." Okay, so you move on. And then you find someone else who's maybe a little less hostile, a little more willing to talk and communicate. And if you treat people just as people and not as Republicans or Democrats or supporting this or supporting that, you break down the barriers. A lot of times you can break through and talk to people, and they have real stories to tell. A lot of them are clandestine because they have things that they're hiding. They have secret marijuana grows in their backyard they don't want you to know about. They have methamphetamine labs that they don't want you to know about. They have a lot of stuff going on, criminal backgrounds, things of that nature. But a lot of people are just, you know, they live out there in the rural, remote environment because they want to get away. They want to be away from civilization. They want to be on their own. They want to be independent. They want to be, you know, devoid of the government and people prodding into their business. So they're a little suspicious of reporters because you're an outsider coming to them. But if you treat people with, you know, respect and courtesy, I think you'll get good results generally.
Like Mike is saying, approaching people. Now, for me, with a camera, I'm very obvious, like Mike and his crew. You got a camera, you're instantly recognized as somebody most people don't want to see at that moment. So when I go up to a place, the cameras are on my sides, they're not up. And I just kind of walk up very slowly, and I can look at their face and I can tell within about 15 seconds whether or not I'm sticking around to take pictures. You just look at their face and it's going to tell you everything. And you just introduce yourself, you talk to them like you would one you talk to, you know, ask them about them, like that, and then maybe you shoot a few pictures. Maybe you say, "Do you mind if I take some images?" Yes or no. You know, if they say yes, then you just say, "Well, I'll just you know, stand here for a few minutes and watch them. Just let them be." Sometimes people will just talk to you, just keep talking, like Marjorie said. They'll just want to talk, and just let them, you know. Let them have that moment, their time, you know, and then you get an idea who they are, you know, and it helps me doing the pictures is to hear who they are and what's going on, you know. So I say it's just you just have to approach them as you'd want to be approached. I've gone to funerals. I've had to cover many funerals recently. A couple of sheriff's deputies the last couple of years, and I've had to go to funerals of friends and things like that recently. And when I'm at a funeral that I'm there to be at, I always wonder, how would I feel if I saw some guy with a camera? What would I think? You know, how would I want to be approached? So when I have to go to cover some of these things, I think about that, how I would feel at that moment. So I try to just keep that in mind and just be kind if I can, you know.
Sam, in terms, what are you looking to cover? And I'll say this after this question. I'm going to open it up to the students for some questions. So be thinking of some things, guys. What do you think to cover 3 or 4 or 5 days after the initial natural disaster, when things have settled down and there's not this urgency anymore? What are some of the themes that you see over and over in these stories that lend themselves to further coverage?
Well, there's the obvious, you know, victim story, and then, you know, the the primary thing, particularly with these fires, is how did this happen? You know, I mean, people were talking about PG&E from day one and without any evidence, obviously, but we started looking at, you know, how could this have happened? And the fact is that, you know, everybody knew the winds were coming, and it didn't seem likely that there had been an arsonist who set 17 different fires all around the North State. So the next supposition is, well, maybe some power lines went down. And then the other thing is, how are they going to rebuild? I mean, Santa Rosa, it would be like Elk Grove burning to the ground. You know, I mean, it's incomprehensible that this amount of devastation. So if this had been, you know, our story, like Eldorado Hills, we'd still be all over it, writing stories every day, and, you know, talking to lawmakers about why wasn't this done, and why didn't they turn the power lines off when they knew the winds were going to get to this certain speed, which is one of the new debates. It just depends on what the tragedy is, but there's always how did this happen? Why did it happen? Was there a failure in the system? Did they send enough firefighters here, or, you know, did they do enough at Oroville during the dam crisis? It just depends on what the crisis is, but there's always a story about, you know, why and how, who failed, if somebody failed, and that's, you know, that doesn't make you very popular with people in the wake of a tragedy, but those are obvious questions that have to be answered.
Let's take some questions from the room. Anybody have any questions, just raise your hand and I'll do something, or we'll have some mic come around.
The only thing that I was wondering about, both when I was following coverage and then just now, was about victim counts, things like that, house counts. Where are you getting the information from? Are you, because, you know, sometimes it's falsely reported or inaccurately reported. You know, how are you taking information that you're getting and then maybe combining it with that, saying, like, I heard about this person, both their parents died, am I checking their names for the list of names that have already been reported, things like that?
We had a real problem with that, because we take the CAL FIRE count, which is the official count, and then we double check it against what all the sheriff's departments are telling us and the other departments. And we got to Saturday, and we had a reporter up in Mendocino County riding around with the sheriff, and the sheriff said, yeah, we've got, I think it said 8 dead, this is our 8th fatality, and so I'm taking that based on the CAL FIRE numbers, and I think we came up with 43. Well, everybody else in the state's reporting 42. So I call our reporter back and I say, are you sure that Mendo's got 8? Absolutely. He's with the sheriff. The sheriff says, yeah, we've got 8. Well, they didn't have 8 at that time. So we're the only ones reporting 43. Everybody's coming to me saying, the Times is saying 42. I know it's 43. I heard the sheriff say it. I know it is. Well, you know, the sheriff had a hard week, and he was wrong. So you do the best you can, but you can't just rely on CAL FIRE, because they're slow to tell you. You know, I mean, they're not counting them as quickly as we need them to be counted. So you work with the local officials, and, you know, this is one of the rare times that we've had a number that didn't match everybody else. It's usually everybody has the same number, because we're all doing it the same way.
So you're cobbling together.
Right. There's no oracle that says this is how many are dead, because CAL FIRE is very conservative in giving out that information, and, you know, it usually comes out days later.
Other questions?
So this is to Rich. So what's your workflow like when you get to a location and then to the process of shooting? Like, how long do you stay at a location to shoot and then sending it off?
Well, on the first morning, it was get something out as quick as possible. You know, so as soon as I got to the early flames on this one road, I mean, it was basically just flames ripping up trees and coming towards me. I pulled down the road a little bit and found a spot that I could, up on the hill, that I could actually hit a cell tower, and I put out 3 pictures. I had them out about 7:30 that morning, then moved on up farther. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to, because now we had photographers out of the San Francisco area going into Santa Rosa, so I knew that coverage-wise, they should be turning up something pretty soon too, but for us, they want everything right now, you know. So after I shot the first stuff, then I went up this road and then found the houses, and as soon as I felt I had good images again, I went back to my little spot and transmitted again. Well, at that point, it was time to try to get it into Napa, so I had to work my way around, which is going to take an hour. So it's kind of a strange thing. You have to, once you think you have some really good images, get them out. You know, just start firing them out. But we were having trouble getting pictures out. We were, you know, cell towers were gone. You couldn't connect. They want us shooting video with our iPhones now. And I found that couple, the brothers, and I found that couple, and I shot that. Now that was they desperately wanted that, and I ended up having to leave from Napa to go up to American Canyon. You know where that's at? Okay, I had to drive out there just to hit a cell tower that it was strong enough to take 30 minutes to send that piece of video. You know, so you're really struggling, and you got, like I say, you got editors in New York calling and say, "Where's the images? Where's things at?" So there's a little clock in your mind that has to say, "Time's getting short," and the other part of your mind has to say, "You got to do it. Let's go. Don't push it. You got to go. Let's move." It's a strange thing.
This is for Rich. You're talking about the flames on the road coming at you. I mean, you're a reporter and you have a job to do, but you're also a human being. What goes through your head when those flames are coming at you? Because, like, for me, I can't even imagine myself in a situation like that. I don't know what I would do. Does the adrenaline just sort of kick in and you just do what you do? It's like mechanical.
My friend and I are going to stand up to those flames as long as we can. I'll tell you that the wind really caught me by surprise. How fast that thing moved across this one area. And at a certain point, you know, it's like, no, I got to go. It's now. And you don't think about it. You know, you try not to. You can't let the situation overcome you. And I think after having done this for so many years, I don't, you know. But it is later on you start thinking about it. I had a strange conversation with my wife a few days later, and I never thought about it. We never had discussed this over 31 years of marriage. But, you know, she said something about, she said, well, there was this lull. You didn't have any pictures for a few hours. Well, how do you know? She goes, well, she goes on, there's a way you can go on to AP and start monitoring the pictures. And she says, when you're out there, we start watching the wire. And then when we see your images, her thought is, oh, he's still alive. And then she said, when it went several hours and we didn't see your pictures, then we started to worry. And I never thought of it that way. It's just, well, I just go off and I gotta go. It's time to go have some fun. Yeah, right. You know, so yeah, you just don't try not to think about it.
I'm curious about, I think it was Sam Stanton who said that the Sacramento reporters don't report on the state the way it used to. How do you avoid, like, mischaracterizing some of these things that happen because of, characterizing these as, like, wine counties being under fire when there may have already been a housing issue, like in Santa Rosa, like homelessness was already a huge issue. Like, do these things or curiosity about migrant workers in the fields, like undocumented folks, like in your long-term reporting of the recovery?
Well, Margie actually wrote a story about that. I'll let her address that.
No, actually, we did talk about that, and that's a really good observation on your part. And we did discuss how the national media had characterized it as, you know, the vineyard fires, and because that's, you know, their audiences, that's how they know that area. But because we know California, and yes, even though we don't cover the state in the same way that we used to, you know, a lot of us have been around a long time, and we understand, you know, the diversity of the counties, even within Napa and Sonoma. And so I did do a story on that, talking about how that the people, you know, even research backs this up, is that the people most likely to be hurt in a situation, in a disaster situation, are people who are already vulnerable, poor, old, elderly, and then we use the data to support that. And it did. I mean, the victim data completely supported that. Mentally ill, disabled, etc. So, but yeah, that's a real tendency. And I think to a certain extent that stereotyping did happen with out-of-state media. I wrote a paper some time back on sort of perils of parachute journalism and how easy it is for reporters because I was a national reporter for so many years, when you chopper into a place and you don't know anything about it, you do tend to fall back on stereotypes. And I think in this particular case, that probably happened a fair amount, but I don't think we were guilty of it, and I would dare say you all weren't either.
We did stories on that. The last story I did. The last story I did in that area was the Wednesday afterwards, the following week. Ellen Nickmar, who's our reporter who's based in San Francisco, she lives in Glen Ellen, and she had to evacuate her house. But on the following week, our whole goal was to find lower income people who had lost their homes and to talk to people. And I found a woman and her kids who had come. She did sitting. Her husband did landscaping. He was out of work. She was out of work. Yet the family that she did babysitting for allowed her and her family to stay at their house. And we talked to her. We talked to other people who to get exactly what you're saying is that everybody's talking about the rich vineyard owners, the big wineries, and all this, but it was actually the workers, and that AP was very aware of that and working really hard to find it.
But to your point, we're feeding 28 McClatchy papers all over the country, so we wanted to use our stuff, not AP stuff or the Times. And so one of the things we had to do on every single story was put our keywords in for our search engine optimization, and the keywords had to include wine country fires because the people on the East Coast had to see, Napa or wine country in their Google searches, so that our stories would come up. That's just the reality of where we are now.
I want to say, also I'll put a plug in for Philip. He, the story that I did on on the vulnerable tending to be the most hurt, he came in and really worked the data on that too. I was really able to add that cement to the story, that dimension. So it wasn't just anecdotal. It really had some heft. And so, it's nice when we can blend those various skills in the newsroom.
Other questions? Yeah.
This question is for any of you, really, but particularly Mike, because he's in broadcasting. I know Sam was mentioning you usually don't want to go to the officials for a more human story. You want to go to the people. But what happens in situations where the only option is like a PIO or a fire chief? And I know oftentimes they like to spit that jargon at you. I mean, how do you break through that?
You hear a lot of jargon from CAL FIRE, and they have their own certain terms and acronyms, and they can just razzle you and dazzle you with that. I just tell them, put it in layman's terms, put it in English, put it in something that I can understand or that folks at home can understand. Cut through the jargon, try to get them to talk in a more conversational way is I think the key to that. One other point I wanted to bring out, I don't think we've really talked about it, is some of the do's and don'ts for you as young reporters if you get into the field of things to be aware of. When we go into a wildfire zone, it's because we have a privilege as the news media. It's encoded in California that we have access, we have a legal right to be there, to go beyond the line, to create some tension, because first of all, not all the law enforcement folks are aware of this law. Sometimes they'll try to stop you and blockade you from going in. We have little cards that we carry with us that notify them in statute what we're referring to. But beyond that, a lot of times the victims don't understand it either. How come you can go see my house, but I can't? That's a tough question. So you want to be really, really sensitive when you're in someone's, area that's burned down. Let me give you some examples of things that I've actually seen reporters do that really make people's stomachs turn. Just because you have access to someone's burned out property doesn't mean that you should treat it disrespectfully. I know of one reporter from another station that I won't name that decided to do a live shot from someone's back porch, sitting in their chair, overlooking the entire yard that had burned down in the house, but the chair was still there. And those people happened to see this report, and they were mad as hornets. You can imagine. Here they are at your home, sitting in your lawn chairs, talking about all the death and destruction around you that you can't even be part of, and they don't even respect your private property rights. So that didn't sit well. They called the station, they complained about it. The news director made a mistake and said, well, we have every right to do that, which is not the right response, and try to, use journalism, as a weapon, as a crutch. But it shows a great deal of insensitivity to your audience. You really want to be respectful. So, we always try to keep that in mind when we're out, covering these things, that we ask people's permission if we can be there. We'll talk to them in the shelters and the evac zones, and if they say, can you visit our house? I'll have them write down or at least acknowledge or say something on camera, yes, you have my permission to be there. And that way, if you're ever questioned or asked by a neighbor or the cops, why are you here? Well, Mabel Brown told us that we could be here. In fact, she asked us to check on our property. So we have the right. We've been given permission to be here. But I think that's just really important as young journalists going out to be respectful of where you are treading. You want to get the best visual, of course, for television news. You want to have the best vantage point. Another thing that I've seen people do is, have you ever seen a reporter in a live shot walk through someone's burned out home? I've seen that a number of times from other reporters. And our station really cracks down on that and says, don't you ever do that again. Because, again, it's disrespectful. You're going through someone's living room, someone's bedroom. They've got their little teddy bears there on the, burned out with, half an ear, stuff like that. It's just awful stuff. And when people see that imagery and you're walking through their home, it just shows contempt and disrespect. It may look visual, it may be powerful images, but it's disrespectful. So you got to keep these things in mind, especially from a television news perspective, because people are seeing that imagery as you're walking through. So try to find another way to tell the story if you can. You can walk around it. You can tell people, I've talked to the homeowner here and they've given us permission to be here. That helps. But just be honest and sensitive, I think, in your reporting.
What do you say when when victims sort of beg you to take them with you? They say, I need to get this thing, can you please just take me in your truck up to the site?
That's a very slippery slope, and you're going to get in big trouble if you do it.
Legally, you can't.
Legally, you can't, because you have the privilege as a news media representative to be there. The people who have been evacuated do not. I know that sounds counterintuitive. The people whose homes are being evacuated can't go see it, but you can. But yet that's California law. That's how it's written. So if you sneak them into your truck, first of all, if you get found out, you're going to be in big trouble. You could be, invoked. You lose your privileges. CHP can say you're out of here, and then you won't have access, and then you won't tell the story. Be able to tell the story. So the best you can do, I think, in a situation like that is just, if you have their permission and consent, you can go visit their property, take pictures, call them on the phone, tell them what they need to know, what they have to hear, and just be honest about it. But you can't sneak people in. You just can't.
Question up here? Okay.
I often get the
We
question.
gotta make that.
I often get the question from students, how many sources do I need? 2, 3? And do they have to be human sources? Can they use online sources? Can you respond to that as veteran reporters? When do you know you've done enough research for a story? Sometimes that's driven by deadlines. How many sources do you need?
Well, it depends on what kind of story you're talking about. If you're accusing someone of sexual harassment, you're going to need more than one, probably. One on the record at least, and some kind of evidence. It just depends. It's really hard to say. It's easier to do stories when you've got documents that back up what someone has told you. but there's no hard and fast rule other than, we're not gonna write a story based on an anonymous source, one source. I mean, we don't write stories on anonymous sources ever anymore, unless it's really something sensitive. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've interviewed people at natural disasters and talked to them for half an hour, and at the end, they won't give me their name. And I say, well, I can't use anything you just said. I mean, I'm really sorry, but it's useless to me, so I gotta go. I gotta find somebody who's got a last name. Fred, me. But that's happened to all of us.
You're not gonna use my name, are you?
Yeah.
Not gonna out.
Take
Yeah.
a picture of somebody and, oh, no, I can't give you my name.
Right. Has that become any, with everything going online now, Sam, I wonder if that's as much of a concern? Is there, when you're getting fed sources from the field, you can just keep putting them, there's not that space limitation, there's not that, or am I wrong about that? Is there a point where you just say, I don't need any more, stop?
Well, yeah, I mean, they don't want us putting 300-inch stories online just because we can. But a breaking news blog is different. And, what we have to do at the Bee now is the Saturday of the fires, I had to go in because I had to write the Sunday story based on everything that I was getting. But I also had to go in at 4 a.m. because I had to start the blog where I had to start feeding this thing. And that's endless. That is 300 inches because every single thing I got, whether it was, hey, there are puppies that got their paws burned that are being treated at UC Davis, that's an item that's going to get a lot of hits, or it's, the death toll is up to 41 now, or whatever. I'm putting that online, and I'm putting a new headline on, and I'm shoveling that out until 3 in the afternoon. By 3 in the afternoon, I've thrown everything we have online, and it's 300 or 400 inches, and then I have to turn around and take it all back and write a story, for the newspaper. So there's no space limitation for those blogs. It's like Oroville. That Oroville thing just went on for days and days, and we just kept shoveling that stuff online.
At KCRA, that's sort of, can you talk a little bit about covering this stuff online for KCRA? You take a similar approach in terms of a blog too, right?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things about all of us here is that we're all multimedia journalists. The old traditional way of, you're just a print newspaper, you're just television, it doesn't work that way anymore. You're now expected, demanded, to be doing more. So for example, in television news as reporters, not only do we have 2 or 3 different TV stories to tell, but we have to do 5 social media posts a day, minimum. 5 social media posts a day. That means Twitter, that means Facebook, that means a web account of your story on top of everything else. So that means when you're out on a fire, not only are you gathering interviews for broadcast, but you're also using your phone and bringing it out and using, like Rich said, using your iPhone as a camera, and you take pictures, you take video, and you try to load it up on Facebook and Twitter and to all your thousands of followers and let them know what's going on, because it's all about digital hits now. That's how they quantify things. They want to make sure that they're getting a good return on that. So that keeps you busy. But here's the challenge. What if you're in one of these wildfire zones and the cell phone towers are out and you have no service? You have to do what Rich did. You have to go drive a half an hour sometimes to find a cell tower that you can upload your videos to get it out to everybody, which takes you away from the story. So you're conflicted because you're short for time. You've only got a limited amount of time to tell this story, and yet the web is demanding this, and Twitter's wanting that, and Facebook is wanting this. So you're under constant pressure to do multi-turns all the time and multi-challenges. So that's the new world that all of you are going to face as journalists. Is you're going to be using your phones more, you're going to be interactive, you're going to be connected, you're going to be expected to have digital followers. It's just the new world of journalism.
Yeah, and that, if I interject something, on the positive side of that for me, I remember that Sam mentioned the Oroville Dam. So if you'll recall, Oroville Dam there was a Facebook post that came out from the Sheriff's Department in Butte County that said in all caps, it's going to break and you have an hour to get out, which was essentially the Sheriff's Department saying tens of thousands of people are going to die. And I remember being in the newsroom that night, and I remember working on those blogs, and it just felt like, I mean, I didn't have a major role that night, but it still felt like the whole world was sort of watching every update. So sometimes you would put up just these small things, and people were so hungry for it. They were just sitting there getting refreshed over and over again. It just, there's something about being a journalist at those times that is just amazing, I guess. I don't know.
Well, remember, looking at the board, you look at the board and go, those numbers can't be right. You know?
The traffic board.
Yeah, 800,000 people are looking at this 2-inch update, that can't be right, but it was unbelievable, because people all over the country, you know, were relying on what the Bee and other news organizations were putting out.
I was just wondering what satisfaction you get out of this story and other stories. That's for all of you. What personal satisfaction do you get? Nothing?
Well, this is what I do. I've been doing this for 7 years, whatever it is. And I've always told students the same thing. It beats working for a living. I've never worked a day in my life. I mean,
No, you must have some reason. You must feel you're doing something.
well, I do. I mean,
For
I'm
the public.
telling people stories. I get the added benefit of seeing things myself. I get the adrenaline, I get the excitement, but I like telling stories that, there's the possibility that they'll help people somehow, I mean, I have no problem whatsoever telling somebody, no, yeah, I'll drive up to your neighborhood and see if your house burned down, and I'll send you pictures so you know. I have no problem if somebody tells me that I'm fake news and they don't want to talk to me and they're weeping. I have no problem putting my hand on their shoulder and saying, I understand, I'm really sorry this happened to you. I mean, it's just what we do. And I'm like Rich, I've got this, so I don't have to be afraid of anything when I go someplace, because this protects me, and it's just, so when some moron tries to grab Mike's mic out of his hand at a rally, and he won't give it to him, he's not gonna give it to him because that's what he does.
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I would just add to that, I agree with everything he said. I'm married to him, by the way, in case anybody took that out. I still love what newspapers can do, is I love in a story like this to provide context. And so that's the story about the poor and the vulnerable. So I still get a kick out of that, and we still have time in the newspaper business to bring that to a fast-moving story, is to take that step back and say, what's the big picture here? So, and that's always different in a disaster. So that's one of the rewards I get, is context.
Go ahead, Mike. I was just going to say, for me, the motivation is making a difference. That maybe your story can actually tip the scale in some way, or motivate change, or bring about something good happening. Maybe the governor's office watches it and says, hey, we have to get more relief to Butte County or to Napa County or something like that, or some sort of investigation comes from it, or people feel that their voices were heard. A lot of these folks there in the wildfire areas feel very powerless. They feel remote. They feel that no one's listening to them. And if you could somehow tell their story, articulate their voice, allow them to talk and say their story in their own words, maybe you are making a difference. Even if it's just to make them feel a little bit better that, yes, you know what, today you were heard.
I guess I'd add to that. All of these other journalists, they're out in the field a bit more than me. But from a perspective of as a data journalist at the Sacramento Bee, I remember the night of the Oroville Dam. I was able to pull up this obscure map from CAL FIRE, and it told me exactly how long it would take the water to get to certain places in the evacuation zone if the dam broke. And I remember just frantically trying to put that together with the help of one of our graphic artists, and then we got it online, and I just felt like I was at the center of the world, that I was doing something that was so important, because people could now look and see, well, this is how much time I have. If that dam breaks, I have 2 hours to get out, or 3, depending on where I am on this map. So it's just rewarding to feel that you're not only telling people stories, but giving them information that they need in these times of crisis.
Oh, we
That's a hard question because I just try to feel that I'm out there showing people what is happening. Okay, this is what's happening to somebody else, and don't be surprised, it can happen to you. I've had a couple instances of theirs not too far from my house. I heard some gunshots. I thought, okay, I better go take a look at this. What's going on? So I walk over, the SWAT team's out there and all this. And I found out that I happen to know the SWAT captain at the time was there, and he told me it's just some old guy who got drunk, was ill, and fired off a shot with his shotgun. But because he fired, they had to come out. Well, they ended up having to shoot the guy because he fired the gun. But as I was walking away, a lady looked at me and she said, well, what do you know? What did he tell you? And I said, well, it's just somebody who's having a little bad day. She goes, well, things like that just don't happen in neighborhoods like this. I said, where do you think they happen? There's a little corner in each town that says bad things happen to people here? No, they can happen anywhere. And people need to realize that. The fires that swept Santa Rosa and Napa, I can tell you now, if the same winds hit right out here, right now, from here to El Hammer Boulevard, we'd be gone in 2 hours. And there's nothing anybody could have done about it, because that's how bad that wind was blowing. So people need to be aware of things around them. I think sometimes that's what I'm trying to show, you know. I will tell you one happy experience, totally different. It has nothing to do with the catastrophe, but sort of does. When the fire burned up in South Lake Tahoe a couple of years ago, this conservation group has been trying to get the forestry and all that to understand that you don't just go in and clean it up immediately because it doesn't naturally grow back as well. And there happened to be a rare woodpecker, black-backed woodpecker, that had re-nested in this area, very rare bird. So this guy took me out there and he says, well, there's a nest, maybe we can see it. We get out there and sure enough, here's the bird. The bird's about here to the pillar there. I had a lens so long that it was almost too big to shoot that bird. We ran the story the next day. The forestry department backed off from clearing that area. And all they asked was to stop for a couple months, let the birds nest eggs. I'm still so happy about that because I felt like I did something, even though it's just for a bird. It just felt good to do something, and I saw the results. That felt good.
I have a question for all of you. How many of you out there actually own a television? Okay. How many of you actually watch television news? More than I expected. How many of you have a newspaper delivered to your home? So what we're seeing here is changing dynamics. All of you are young and you get news delivered in a different way than all of us as more traditional journalists. But the world is changing. I have kids who are a little bit older than you are. One of them doesn't even own a television. The other doesn't watch TV news. I'm in the business, so that's the audience we're going for, and they're not watching. It's all changing. And so how do you get your news? Anybody? Facebook? Okay. Guess? Oh, phone, cell phone? So Facebook and cell phones, how do you know that you're getting reliable information?
I mainly get mine through, I will check my social media feeds, but it'll be through news organizations using their social media feeds. I tend not to get into, like long Twitter threads with people throwing out, like, oh, I found this person's phone number, stuff like that. I don't really look at those that much.
So for those, go ahead.
I have like a news feed on my phone, so like I'll get updates and alerts from like different news stories. Basically, that's all. But yeah.
So, if you're getting your news from Facebook, what? From what source?
Like I follow CBS News and the Bee and the New York Times and a few others. So,
Yeah.
So here's what's happening, at least in television news. If you go onto the cable networks, it's becoming much more polarized. So you can listen or watch MSNBC and you'll get the left-wing perspective. You can watch Fox News, you'll get the right-wing perspective. Everybody has their audience, and what's happening more and more is we're starting to see a self-fulfilling feedback loop. People will watch and hear and listen to only what they believe. So you're never going to change anybody's mind. You're never going to hear dialogue or discussion anymore. It's always people screaming at you and telling you the point of view that you already believe in. That's what's happened with, you know, politics and society, and this is some of the dynamic that, you know, I think all of us are facing as journalists too. It's a very polarized world out there.
But do you find with natural disasters that there's something of an exception to that? I mean, it feels to me like when the Orville Dam's about to break, or when Napa and Lake County are on fire, people go back to the traditional sources, or am I naive?
They go back to the traditional sources, and then they write comments about how this is Jerry Brown's fault, you know, or so-and-so's fault. I mean, because that's what they believe, and that's just the way it is. And most of them don't actually read the stories we write. They call me up and yell at me about, you know, a headline, and it's clear they haven't read the story. So for people to actually take the time to look at the number at the bottom and call, I mean, that takes some effort, but it happens all the time.
One thing that we're finding, and perhaps you've seen it in your coverage too, you go to a lot of these areas, especially rural areas, there's a lot of distrust of government. They don't believe the government agencies. Department of Water Resources, which is, you know, the overseer of Oroville Dam. You talk to folks in Oroville and Butte County about that, they sure don't trust them.
One of the raps that I think we hear against a lot of these organizations after natural disasters, and also more recently mass shootings, is that the media come in by the hundreds, and then within days they're gone. And there is kind of a longer tail to the story that isn't followed. And so people feel exploited, they feel manipulated or just ignored in the aftermath. Is there, Philip, I believe Philip mentioned this, the kind of a few days out, the game plan there, but is there a longer term game plan for going back and making sure that you are telling the full story of the natural disaster? Especially, I think, again, in mass shooting context, that's one of the worst ones I've seen recently, where people just kind of drop by and they get the glory and they're gone. What do you think about that?
I don't know about your newsroom, but in many television newsrooms, it's run by people with attention deficit disorder. And they have very, very short time spans of what's important. I mean, look at what happened today. Big story at 7 o'clock this morning, Matt Lauer gets fired from NBC because of sexual misconduct. By 1 o'clock, that had been booted off the front page because of Garrison Keillor being associated with sexual misconduct. It's the news cycle. I call it the shiny ball syndrome. Oh, shiny ball, shiny ball, shiny ball. And they go cover it. That's what they want, the shiny ball. So this is especially endemic in television news because it's a visual medium and people want to have visual stimuli every 20 seconds to reinforce whatever they're thinking or seeing. So yes, there is a lack of attention to long-term coverage. Guilty as charged. But I think that's sort of the nature of the medium. And we are in a constant 24/7 news cycle now where people constantly want to be updated and what's new, what's the new revelation, oh, that's old news, let's move on.
We have a little more luxury than TV does, I think. I mean, we'll go back to Tehama County in 6 months or whatever and look at, what, if anything, has changed up there. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've done an anniversary story. I went back to Weed a year after the Bulls fire to see how the rebuilding effort was going, if in fact they'd gotten the aid that they had been promised. I mean, the newspapers have that ability to do that just because we typically have more people and don't have to, cover every breaking thing that, Mike has to go trot out and do.
Do you plan for this? Do you have a calendar to say, 6 months, a year down the line, I'm going to go back?
Some things, yeah.
I think that's a great question, though. I wanted to compliment you on it because I'm very sympathetic about this because I'm from a really small town. And I think that the Texas shooting was a really good example of that, where there were more media representatives in that little town than there were people living in the town. And I think it was very overwhelming for the residents there. So I used to teach ethics at a think tank down in Florida, and I think that that's going to be continue to be a real challenge for us in our profession, is how to police ourselves in stories like this, particularly in rural settings.
I just want to say, from AP's perspective, we're a little bit in between both. We come in very hard, very fast. We were there for Tehama. I was there the Tuesday night, all day Tuesday through the night, and was told to go ahead and come on home on Wednesday night. Our reporter didn't come back till the next day. Spent a little bit longer time than I did. Up in Roseburg, Oregon, the shooting there, I was there for 4 days, pulled out. Then our people in Oregon, the Portland Bureau, kind of took over away from the national crew, and they covered it for a few days. But we, in a sense, go in and hit hard, and then we're gone. And sometimes you do feel sorry for the people because, yeah, it's like we come in, the media blows into a place, rips in, they want to know everything about you, they want to talk about everything, and then they want to leave. And then everybody's just left standing there, and it's hard.
I had kind of an off-shooting question about that. In my community college, there were a couple of different events when I was on the paper there where other media outlets in the area came and covered. There was a hostage, or not a hostage, like a hostage negotiation situation a couple of blocks from school that shut down traffic coming into school, so we went out and covered that. And I saw a TV reporter, not from KCRA, but from one of the other local ones, be told by someone, hey, I got video of the gunman, will you give me anything for it? And they had cash on hand ready to pay for it.
Really?
Yeah. Similar situations at a shooting at Sacramento City College, the sister college of ARC, where I went and covered that. Similar situation. So is there any, I guess there's like 3 different outlets of reporting here as far as B and then KCRA and then AP about, everyone is kind of their own reporter now, getting photo or video of their own backyard, whatever's happening. What is your strategy or, preparedness for that kind of situation?
So at KCRA, the general rule of thumb is we don't pay to play. We don't pay people for their video. If they want to give it to us and talk to us and we can authenticate it and verify that they were there and this is truly something they shot, we'll probably talk to them and interview them as well to provide context and perspective on that. But as a general rule of thumb, we won't pay because I think it diminishes the veracity of what you're seeing. You don't know where the source is coming from. We do use stringers. You probably use them too. These are people that are sort of scanner junkies, I guess you might call them. They listen to what's going on in the scanner traffic. If there's a horrible accident at the airport or something like that, and we have a relationship with them, they might get $50 for a piece of video or something like that. But it's someone that we've worked with over the context of time and provides video that, at 2 in the morning, no one else is going to have. But as a general rule of thumb, no, we don't pay.
We don't pay.
Yeah, no, I want to say the Sac City one in particular, I don't remember who, but there was a Sacramento Bee reporter there, and someone came up and said, hey, I got video of the guy dying and stuff, and Sacramento Bee talked at length with the person about what they had seen, but didn't say, hey, give me the video or anything like that.
It's good.
I think those 3 actually.
Those KCRA 3?
Yeah.
Okay, it might have been both, because we were both there, but I think it was different areas. Okay.
About the digital news topic that had passed by, as someone from the Santa Rosa area, I was thinking about this because I wasn't looking to the news to find out whether or not my parents' house was still there, but I was checking Facebook because even though that wasn't verifiable, it was consistent, and I knew that my community wanted that. So if it was, say, Sacramento that was on fire, would you as journalists report for the details of the community or for audiences that had resources to give?
Facebook for us is a lead, really, more than anything else. We're not going to report something that someone, said on Facebook. It has to be verified. But if you see somebody in a consistent post and there's a lot of traffic about it, about a certain neighborhood, something happened, regarding a fire or something, that gives us at least a hook, a peg, someplace where we can go and verify independently, going there, talking to people, we do cross-checks on them, LexisNexis, and other outlets. So it's a source that has to be verified.
And to your other question, if Sacramento's burning, we're going to be telling people where it's burning, where the danger is, how to get out, how to get help, here's where to go, here's what to do. We're not going to be thinking about what the national audience wants. Our commitment is to the people here, obviously.
Even though that might take hours to be updating, as what happened with Press Democrat.
Well, they were in a different situation. I mean,
Yeah.
I want to address the Press Democrat, though. I was in their newsroom, and that place was at full blast. They had brought cots in. Their people were not going home. They were eating there. They were sleeping there. I have the ultimate respect for what that paper and their people were doing. Having been in it, I know some of their people there, and you can only get information out at so fast. That's it. You know, you're trying to get information out as quickly and accurately. We have taken, AP's kind of taken an approach, like, our goal has always been first. Our goal now is to be accurate. We are now willing to step back and be a step behind everybody else if we're accurate. Because when you have to go back and retract something, that loses your credibility. And I know, I can understand what you guys went through between 42 and 43. You're doing the best you can to get accurate information. But if somebody tells you, and Sam, you heard the guy say 8 people, what are you supposed to do? You know? So like I said, I know the Press Democrat was working their tails off to get information out. And the people in that area were working very hard to get information out. But you are facing, especially those early days, you're facing, and like I said, I've covered forest fires in this area for 30 years now, and it's being reported as the worst in California history. That is absolutely the truth. I have never seen a fire destroy so quickly, so completely. Everything I saw was white ash. White ash means that was the ultimate hot. Car tires, car wheels, you would see little rivers of white, of silver. That was the aluminum wheels that had melted. So that fire was intense, and like I say, those people were working hard. I think everybody there was working hard to try to get information accurately out.
Well, didn't one of their photographers, wasn't he the first one?
Oh, Kent Porter is a friend of mine. I've known Kent for years. We took a workshop together in Santa Fe. He almost destroyed my rental car, but that's another story. But yeah, he was there. The fire happened not too far from his house. He got over to Larkfield, which was the area I knew very well, where my friend's house got destroyed, and where I'm going Saturday. My friend hasn't gone back to his house. I agreed to go back with him Saturday to the house. And I've already warned him, it's going to be harder than you think. I've seen it, I've been to the house, and it is hard to look at. And yeah, Ken did a phenomenal job. He really did an outstanding job in those hours, and he was just working his tail off. So I just wanted to get that.
and when you hear people talking about fake news, think about the images you've seen this year of newsrooms in Houston and Florida and Puerto Rico, and you know, where people have lost their homes, but they're still sitting in their newsrooms, or they're filing out of their cars, you know, because they can't go home. They're not doing it because they're getting paid to do it. They're doing it because that's what they do, you know. Their job is to provide information to the readers and the viewers to help them, you know, not for glory and not because it's cool. That's just what everybody does, you know. That's why those people in Houston worked through, you know, this horrific flood, because they had to get out there and report. That's why Philip came up with, you know, this idea of if they're all gonna get flooded out by the Orville Dam breaking, I need to tell them when it's gonna happen so they can get the hell out.
I wanted to throw sort of a giant yellow flag of caution out there for all of you as young journalists, that there are people and forces out there who are deliberately trying to trip you up, trying to mislead you. Case in point, you might have read about it just today or yesterday. The Washington Post did an interview with a young woman who claimed that she had been impregnated by Roy Moore, running for Senate in Alabama, and that this was a secret that was coming out. And she kept asking questions about, well, how do you feel about this, and how do you think this will affect the campaign? Well, it turns out the whole thing was a ruse. It was a red herring. This was a woman who was planted by an organization that deliberately tries to trip up news organizations, to make them look bad, to defile them, to undermine their credibility, all for a political gain at someone's expense. So I bring that up because this is the new context that we live in, where there are people that will mislead you, deceive you, tell you lies, and you have to be very careful of who your sources are. And you asked the question about how many sources. Well, in this case, they double-checked, triple-checked, and her story just didn't add up. So be aware that not everybody is innocent, and you can't always assume that they're telling you the truth.
I have a question about the financials. When you hear disasters, the first thing you see or you hear is how much it's costing. Who's getting those news? You are interviewing victims and people.
I'll take that one. Usually there's some sort of estimate by CAL FIRE in terms of the value of the structures burned, but it's not very quick. It usually takes them a while. Am I right about that, Sam?
Yeah, and the insurance department will issue an
Yeah.
estimate, and they're always wrong.
Yeah. Not much of a lot of thing, but, yeah.
You gotta have second research, yeah.
Any questions? All right, well, let's give a big round of
Can I
applause.
just say-
Oh,
Just of all, I think you all ought to appreciate the fact that you've got the Sacramento Bee in the area, which is an outstanding paper. I mean, you've got two of the best people sitting right here. You should read their paper, not you should. You haven't let me finish. Okay? It's always nice to let people finish before you ask the question. Okay, but let me finish on the Bee. You should subscribe. You should support your local newspapers. Mike, I've known Mike for years. I've seen him in the field. I'm always happy to see him and share information. We've shared information. You know, they do a good job of getting out there at first. We have a new person who took over our bureau a few months ago, and I kept insisting that we have to leave one of the TVs on 3. Because if something's going to happen in this area, they are going to break in first. So if we see it on CNN, AP's 3 hours behind, and we don't want to be that far behind. So it's leave it on 3. I did have a personal story I wanted to say about Sam. Yes. Sam and I covered the Garrido trial together. The J.C. Lee Dugard, remember her? She was kidnapped when she was 11. They found her years later. Yeah, the trial was there up in Placerville, in a very small courthouse. And it was going to be very restricted for the media to get in there. So the first day, the first trial, this courthouse opened at 7. Okay, I'm going to get there early. I get there at 6:30. Sam is just getting out of his car. And it got to be a point where every time there was a hearing, he and I were the first two, either 1 or 2, to get there. And it goes back to what he said about don't hesitate, get going. And one other thing about what he did is it killed us. Our reporter who covered it was based in San Francisco. Sam, based here, had good contacts. When they finally cut a plea deal with Garrido, Sam's contact called them. I applaud you. I tip my hat for that, for that journalism.
I called and said, you need to get up the hill right now. I got there just as they were locking the courtroom door,
Yeah.
so I got inside to see it.
So that's just one of the things, but that's good reporting. That's good reporting, establishing contacts and being there all the time. You gotta be there. So that's what I just wanted to say about my brother and the other parts of the media.
Big round of applause. Here we go.